The first time I noticed it, I didn't think much of it. Just a hum, soft, almost under his breath, as he washed the dishes. My husband, Ethan, had never been one for music. Sure, he had a few classic rock albums he'd dust off every now and then, but new music? Never. He always joked that real music stopped being made in the 90s. But that night, as I folded laundry in the living room, I caught it. A melody I didn't recognize. I tilted my head, listening carefully. It wasn't a tune from one of his old favorites. No Rolling Stones, no Pink Floyd, not even the grungy sound of Nirvana. It was soft, smooth, modern. The kind of song you'd hear on a playlist called Late Night Vibes, or Chill Romance. "Hey," I called from the living room, half smiling. "What's that song you're singing?" He glanced over his shoulder, hands still submerged in soapy water. His face was blank for a second, like I'd asked him a trick question. "Oh, that," he said casually, looking back at the plate in his hands. "I think I heard it on the radio." The radio? We barely ever listened to the radio. We had playlists, podcasts, and YouTube like everyone else. But I didn't press it. People hear songs in passing all the time. I let it go. The next few days passed uneventfully. Work, dinner, scrolling on our phones side by side on the couch. Normal life stuff. Except, he hummed it again. This time in the shower. I pressed my ear to the bathroom door, listening more carefully. The sound of water splashing and the faint, muffled melody of that same unfamiliar tune. I strained to make out the words. It was in English, but I could only catch fragments. Something about never looking back, and you were never enough. My stomach tensed for reasons I couldn't quite explain. That night, I lay in bed next to him, my eyes open, staring at the ceiling while he scrolled on his phone. The glow of the screen flickered against the wall. Every once in a while, he chuckled at something he was watching. "I glansst over." TikTok. I turned away, trying to brush off the unease that had been crawling under my skin since earlier. It was nothing. People get songs stuck in their heads. It's normal. But it didn't feel normal. The next day, when he left for work, I sat at the kitchen table, eating a cold piece of toast, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. My mind wouldn't let it go. The song. The way he hummed it, like it meant something. Like it belonged to him. Then a thought hit me. Spotify. Ethan had a Spotify account, one we sometimes shared during long road trips. I pulled out my phone and opened the app, logging into his account. He didn't even have a password lock on it. I went straight to recently played. My heart was already racing, but I told myself I was being ridiculous. It's just curiosity, I thought. Just curiosity. But when I scrolled down, my breath caught in my throat. A playlist. One I'd never seen before. The name of it stopped me cold. Lena. I clicked on it, fingers suddenly clammy. The cold sweat of instinctive dread soaking into my skin. It wasn't just one or two songs. It was a whole playlist, 23 songs long. Love songs. Songs about longing, about missing someone, about passion and secrecy. I stared at the titles, my eyes darting from one to the next. Stay with me. You are my weakness. Better than her. My hand shook as I scrolled. Each title hit harder than the last. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't take a full breath. Then I saw it. A song added just 2 days ago. I'll always choose her over you. My fingers went still on the screen. I read it twice. Then a third time. I felt a sharp, piercing ache right in the center of my chest. My heart didn't just break. It cracked, jagged and raw. I could feel each shard cutting into me. I sat there for a long time, too stunned to cry, too stunned to breathe properly. Just staring at that title. I'll always choose her over you. Played it. The soft intro trickled in, smooth piano chords. Then the lyrics hit. No more excuses, I've made up my mind. She's the one I run to every time. My stomach churned. My hand slapped over my mouth to stifle the sob that threatened to break free. The voice, smooth as honey, sang every word that Ethan had never had the courage to say to my face. But this wasn't just a song. This was a confession, and I knew exactly who it was for. Lena. Her name felt dirty on my tongue. Bitter. Like swallowing something spoiled. For a moment I thought about calling him. Demanding answers. I even reached for my phone, fingers hovering over his name. But I stopped. No. Not like this. If I confronted him now, he'd lie. He'd twist it into something innocent. It's just a song, babe. You're being crazy. I knew the script. I knew it too well. Instead, I closed the app and sat in the silence of my kitchen, feeling the weight of the truth settle on me like concrete. I didn't need him to confess. I didn't need him to tell me her name. I already knew. The next few days were a fog of routine. I moved through the house like a ghost, going through the motions. I still cooked dinner. Still folded his clothes. But inside something had snapped. One night he walked in, kissed me on the cheek like nothing was wrong. I felt his lips press against my skin and had to clench my fists to keep from shoving him away. Later that night, I saw him scrolling through his phone again. The glow of the screen lit up his face. He smiled. Not at me. Something else. Or someone. I didn't ask. I didn't have to. I excused myself to the bathroom, closed the door quietly, sat on the edge of the tub and opened Spotify on my phone. The playlist. It had a new song added. Fresh. Just an hour ago. I scrolled down, stomach in knots. My heart knew it would be bad, but nothing prepared me for the words. If she asks, I'll deny it. I turned off the phone and pressed my hands against my face. My breath came in short gasps as tears burned down my cheeks. This wasn't just a playlist. It was a diary. A collection of secret notes. Each song a piece of a larger confession. I could see it so clearly now. Every business trip. Every late night at work, every excuse about traffic. All of it was written in these songs. He thought I'd never see it. He thought he was clever. But I saw it. And now I can't unsee it. That night, as he lay next to me, his back turned, I stared at him for a long time. His breathing was slow, steady, peaceful like a man with no worries in the world. I wondered if he dreamed of her. The next day I packed a bag. Just a small one. Not enough for him to notice. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I wouldn't stay. Later that evening, he hummed that stupid tune again, completely oblivious. I stood there in the doorway of the kitchen, arms crossed, watching him with fresh eyes. Not love-struck eyes. Not naive eyes. Just clear ones. Hey, I said, my voice steady. What's that song you're singing? He turned to me, same confused look as before. Oh, just something I heard on the radio. I smiled. A tight, bitter smile. Funny, I said, walking past him. It sounds like something from Lena's playlist. I didn't look back to see his reaction. I didn't have to. I heard his breath catch, a sharp inhale of shock. The silence behind me was louder than any song he'd ever sing. The weight of that moment stayed with me longer than I expected. I could feel it pressing down on my chest as I walked away from him, step by step, with the quiet satisfaction of knowing I had just shattered his illusion of control. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Silence has a way of exposing everything. It's louder than yelling, more piercing than accusations. It's the kind of quiet that makes a person realize they've been caught, and there's no escape. I went upstairs, closed the bedroom door behind me, and sat on the edge of the bed. My hand shook as I reached for my phone, but it wasn't fear. It was adrenaline. The kind that comes after you stand your ground for the first time in a long, long while. I scrolled back to the playlist. Lena. The name stared at me like a taunt, each letter sharper than the last. I didn't know who she was, not her face, not her age, not even where she lived. But I knew everything I needed to know. She wasn't some random coworker or a passing fling. No one makes a whole playlist for just a fling. I opened the list again, scrolling slowly this time, reading the titles like they were chapters of a story I never agreed to be part of. Every song told me something new. Secret nights. Call me when she's gone. No one has to know. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't even clever. It was just blatant. Obvious. As if he'd grown so comfortable in his deception that he didn't bother hiding it anymore. Or maybe he thought I'd never think to look. That made me angrier than anything. Not the lies. Not even the betrayal. It was the arrogance. The assumption that I wouldn't notice, that I wouldn't check. Like I was stupid. Like I was blind. I sat there for a long time, breathing slow and steady, thinking. A version of me, the old me, might have stormed downstairs right then and there, phone in hand, screaming, "Who is she?" But I wasn't her anymore. I wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. The satisfaction of seeing me lose control. The satisfaction of twisting it into "you're crazy." Or, "It's not what you think." No, I wasn't going to play that game. I had learned something in the years I'd been with Ethan. He liked to control the narrative. He liked to stay one step ahead, always calm, always rational, while I was left playing catch-up. This time I was going to be quiet, methodical, calculated, just like him. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Ethan was still asleep, his face half buried in the pillow. His arm was slung over his side, and I stared at it for a moment, thinking about how many times I'd seen that exact pose and felt warmth, safety, love. But now it just looked fake. His body, his breath, his presence in this house. It all felt like a lie I'd been tricked into believing. I got up without making a sound, careful not to wake him. I went downstairs, made a pot of coffee, and sat at the kitchen table scrolling through his Spotify history again. It wasn't just Lena. There were other playlists too. Playlists with meaningless names like Drive Time and Workout Beats. But I knew better now. I clicked through them one by one. Most were innocent. A mix of old rock and pop hits. But then I found it. Another one. Late Hours. I opened it already knowing what I would find, but it still hit me in the chest like a punch. Same type of songs. Slow, sultry, and full of lyrics about stolen moments and forbidden love. Not as many songs as Lena, but enough. Enough to tell me that this wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a one-time thing. This was a pattern. I heard him walking around upstairs, his heavy footsteps creaking against the floorboards. He'd be coming down soon. My heart picked up speed. I didn't want him to see me like this, sitting at the table scrolling through his secrets. So I locked my phone, set it face down, and sipped my coffee like it was just another ordinary morning. Morning, he muttered, scratching the back of his head as he shuffled into the kitchen. His eyes were still foggy with sleep, and he didn't look at me right away. Morning, I replied, as calm as I could manage. I watched him out of the corner of my eye as he poured himself a cup of coffee. His movements were slow, casual, like he had nothing in the world to worry about. He leaned against the counter, scrolling through his phone like usual, probably checking sports scores or news headlines. For a moment I wondered if he'd check the Spotify app. If he'd see that I'd looked at his playlists. But I knew he wouldn't. He never did. He was so sure of himself. So sure that I'd never question him. I took another sip of coffee, letting the bitterness sit on my tongue. Hey, I said casually, setting my cup down. Who's Lena? I didn't even look at him. I just said it, letting it hang in the air like cigarette smoke. I felt him freeze. I didn't have to see it to know. His hand stopped moving. His breath got shallow. It was subtle, but I'd been with him long enough to hear it. Lena, he repeated, his voice too casual, too controlled. Who's that? I finally looked up at him. He was already looking at me, eyebrows raised, pretending to be confused. But there was something else. His eyes darted just for a split second like he was calculating something. His face was too neutral, too blank. He knew. He knew I knew. Yeah, I said slowly, tilting my head just slightly. Lena. Your playlist. I watched his eyes carefully. Didn't think I'd notice, huh? His mouth opened like he was going to speak, but no words came out. His tongue pressed against the inside of his cheek. A habit he had when he was thinking. Trying to figure out his next move. I don't know what you're talking about, he said finally, shaking his head. It's probably just some random name the algorithm came up with. You know how Spotify is. I nodded slowly, my gaze locked on him like a hunter tracking prey. Sure, I said, leaning forward. Except I saw the songs, Ethan. I didn't blink. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even flinch. I just let the truth sit there between us. Heavy. Unmovable. He exhaled sharply through his nose and ran a hand down his face. God, you're being paranoid again, he muttered, turning away from me. Always looking for something that's not there. There it was. The script. The one I'd heard before. The one I'd fallen for so many times. Paranoid. Overreacting. Making things up. But not this time. Paranoid. I repeated, letting out a short, bitter laugh. Paranoia is when you think something's happening. But I know it's happening, Ethan. I see it. I tapped my phone, still face down on the table. I see every single song you added. He stopped. Completely still. His back to me. I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers twitched at his sides. He didn't say anything. How long, Ethan? I asked, my voice colder now. How long have you been picking her over me? He didn't answer. Not right away. I could see his head tilt just slightly like he was weighing his options. Lie. Admit. Deflect. I knew every option he was considering because I'd seen it before. Finally he turned halfway, just enough for me to see his face. There was no more confusion on it. No more performance. He looked at me like a man caught red-handed. Does it matter? He said quietly, his eyes dark and flat. I felt something inside me break. But this time it didn't hurt. It didn't burn. It didn't tear me apart. It set me free. Yeah, I said, standing up slowly, my chair scraping against the floor. It matters. And this time I didn't look back. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I had to leave. My footsteps felt heavier than usual as I moved up the stairs, like each step was dragging years of betrayal behind me. My breathing was steady, but my heart was racing so fast it felt like it might break free from my chest. Every nerve in my body was on edge, every part of me bracing for him to follow me, to grab my arm, to try and stop me. But he didn't. He just stood there in the kitchen, silent, like a man watching the consequences of his actions finally catch up to him. I closed the bedroom door behind me, locking it with a slow, deliberate twist. Not because I thought he'd come after me, but because I wanted him to know he wasn't welcome. I stood there for a second, staring at the lock, letting my fingers linger on the cool metal. Felt symbolic, final. A barrier he couldn't cross anymore. I sat on the edge of the bed, my mind numb but somehow racing at the same time. 1,000 thoughts clashed together, none of them clear. Anger, sadness, disgust, regret. All of it spinning so fast it made me feel lightheaded. I sat there, hands on my knees, trying to breathe through it. My chest felt tight, like I was holding back a scream that had been building for years. I thought about every moment that led to this point, every time I ignored my gut, every time I chose to trust him when something felt off. I thought about the nights he came home late, the smell of his cologne still fresh on his clothes. I thought about the sudden texts he'd get and how he'd turn his phone away from me, tilting the screen just slightly as if I wouldn't notice. I thought about every moment I let it slide because I didn't want to be that woman. The one who's always suspicious, always paranoid. I'd swallowed my doubt for so long it had started to taste normal. But now? Now it tasted like poison. I stood up and grabbed my suitcase from the closet. It made a dull thud as I dropped it on the bed. The zipper was stiff, and for a moment, it felt like even the luggage didn't want to help me leave. I yanked it hard and it finally slid open. I didn't pack in a rush. No, ipaka slowly. Intentionally. I pulled clothes from the dresser and folded them neatly, one by one. Shirts, jeans, sweaters. Each item I placed in that suitcase felt like a step closer to reclaiming myself. I wasn't just packing clothes, I was packing me. The version of me that had been buried under years of compromise, of bending myself to fit into a shape that made him comfortable. There was a strange calm that came over me while I packed. I thought I'd be crying, sobbing uncontrollably like in the movies. But no. I was clear-headed. Sharper than I'd ever felt before. The tears had already come in the kitchen when I saw that playlist. Now there was nothing left to cry about. Now there was only action. As I zipped up the suitcase, I heard footsteps on the stairs. Slow, hesitant. I knew it was him. I didn't stop what I was doing. If he wanted to see me leave, he could watch every second of it. I wasn't hiding. Not anymore. The door handle jiggled. Then the knock. 3 soft taps. Come on, Emma. His voice was muffled but clear. Steady. Too steady. Can we just talk? I didn't answer. I reached into my nightstand drawer and pulled out the small box where I kept my jewelry. My wedding ring was still on my finger. I twisted it slowly, feeling the cool metal glide against my skin, and slid it off. I placed it in the box on top of the earrings he'd given me for our 5th anniversary. For a second I just stared at it, my heart aching in a way I didn't expect. Not because I wanted to keep it, but because it represented everything I thought I'd built. A house. A marriage. A future. It was all supposed to mean something. But it didn't anymore. The knock came again, louder this time. Emma. Seriously. You're blowing this way out of proportion. His tone had shifted. No longer calm, now irritated. The kind of irritation that comes when someone realizes they're losing control. I could hear it in his voice. He thought he could reel me back in. He thought he still had power here. I zipped the jewelry box shut, placed it neatly on the dresser, and turned to the door. "I'm not blowing anything out of proportion, Ethan," I said loud enough for him to hear, my voice cold and steady. "You did that all on your own." Silence. I could practically hear him thinking on the other side of the door. "Babe," he said after a pause, his voice softer now, like he was trying to play the reasonable husband card. "It's just music. You know how Spotify is. It recommends stuff, it makes playlists. I didn't even name it. It's just some random algorithm." I actually laughed. I sat on the bed and laughed like it was the funniest joke I'd ever heard. My eyes squeezed shut, tears finally spilling down my cheeks, but not from sadness. No, this was something else entirely. The audacity of it. The sheer, ridiculous audacity of a man standing on the edge of exposure, and still thinking he could gaslight his way out of it. "You think I'm stupid, Ethan?" I called out, wiping my eyes. "You think I don't know the difference between an algorithm and a man lying to his wife?" I heard him curse under his breath. "Don't do this," he said, more forceful now. "You're mad. I get it. Fine. But you're gonna ruin everything over a playlist." I stood up, grabbed my suitcase, and wheeled it to the door. My hand hovered over the lock, and for a second, I wondered what would happen if I opened it. Would he try to stop me? Would he grab my arm, block the door, beg me to stay? Or would he step aside, knowing that any attempt to stop me would just make it worse? Only one way to find out. I unlocked the door. Slowly. Intentionally. The click of it echoed louder than it should have. I opened it just wide enough to see him standing there, leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed, eyes hard, jaw tight. He looked at me the way he always did when he didn't get his way. Like I was being unreasonable. Like I was being too emotional. It was the face of a man who wasn't sorry for what he did. Only sorry he got caught. "Move," I said quietly, locking eyes with him. I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. "Move or I'll make you move." His eyes narrowed, lips pressing into a thin line. For a second, I saw the battle play out in his head. Push me, yell, demand that I stay. But he knew better. He knew me. And he knew that if he made one wrong move, I'd scream so loud the neighbors would hear. He didn't want that. Not Mr. Perfect Husband. Not Mr. I'm so calm and collected. He stepped aside. I pulled my suitcase past him, my heart thudding like a war drum in my chest. I could feel his eyes on me as I walked down the hall, every step an act of defiance. Every step a declaration of freedom. When I reached the stairs, he called out one last time. "You're gonna regret this, Emma," he said, his voice low and sharp. "No one's gonna love you like I did." I paused. My hand gripped the banister so hard my knuckles turned white. My whole body tensed, heat rising up my spine. I wanted to spin around, yell, scream, tell him that he didn't know a damn thing about love. But I didn't. I just tilted my head back, looked at the ceiling for a second, and exhaled slowly. Then I smiled. Not a big smile. Just a small, knowing one. The kind of smile you give someone when they've already lost, but don't realize it yet. "You're right, Ethan," I said over my shoulder. "No one's gonna love me like you did." I took the first step down, then another, letting each word sink in. And thank God for that. I didn't look back. I didn't have to. I knew what I'd see. Him standing there defeated, realizing that no song, no playlist, no amount of sweet words would ever bring me back. I walked down the stairs slowly, deliberately, like each step was part of a ritual. My suitcase rolled softly behind me, its wheels clicking lightly against each step. I didn't rush. I didn't need to. There was no more reason to hurry. The hardest part was already over. I'd seen the truth, named it, and walked away from it. Everything after that was just movement. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I glanced around the house. Our house. The place where we'd made plans, shared holidays, fought over paint colors, and stayed up too late watching bad TV. I used to think these walls held memories, but now it felt like they only held lies. Every room suddenly looked smaller, colder, emptier. The kitchen table where we'd sat laughing over wine now felt like a crime scene. The couch where we'd watched movies now looked like a stranger's furniture. I didn't even recognize it anymore. I took a slow breath, held it for a second, and let it out. I wasn't coming back. I knew that much. No amount of begging, no half-hearted apologies, No empty promises could pull me back into this house. It wasn't a home anymore. It was just a place where I'd lived with someone I thought I knew. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and scrolled through my contacts. My thumb hovered over my sister's name. Anada. She'd always told me I could stay with her if I needed to. Anytime, Em, she'd said after one of our long, wine-fueled conversations. Back then I'd laughed it off, thinking I'll never need that. Funny how life works. I pressed her name and waited as it rang. My eyes stayed fixed on the front door, my heart beating slowly but steadily. Hey! Anna's voice came through the line, bright and full of life like always. What's up? You good? Not really, I said, my voice quieter than I expected. I cleared my throat and tried again. I'm coming over. There was a pause on the other end. Just a second of silence. But I could feel her shift from casual sister to concerned sister in that heartbeat. Okay, she said softly. No questions. No pressure. Just okay. You want me to come get you? I glanced at my suitcase. I could drive. I was still steady, still in control. No, I've got it. I'll be there in 20. Doors unlocked, she said. Her voice was warm but firm, like she was already preparing for whatever storm I was about to bring with me. You want me to make coffee or open the wine? Wine, I said, smiling faintly despite everything. Biggest bottle you've got. She laughed lightly, a sound I didn't realize I needed until I heard it. Got it. See you soon, sis. I hung up, slid my phone into my pocket, and tightened my grip on the suitcase handle. My fingers felt steady, stronger than they had in weeks. I took one last look around the house, letting my eyes linger on each room for just a second. The kitchen, the living room, the hallway where we'd hung up all those stupid framed quotes about love and family. Love grows here, one of them said. I laughed under my breath, shaking my head at the irony. Not anymore. I reached for the front door, fingers curling around the cold metal handle. But before I pulled it open, I heard him. Emma. His voice echoed from the top of the stairs. It wasn't loud. He didn't yell. It was that low, controlled tone he always used when he wanted me to listen. I didn't turn around. Don't do this, he said, his voice steady, calm, the way it always was when he was trying to be the reasonable one. Come on, it's me. It's us. Us. He still thought there was an us. How do you explain to someone that us ended the moment you saw their betrayal laid out in song after song, confession after confession? There's no coming back from that. No us after that. I didn't turn around. I didn't even blink. There is no us, Ethan, I said, my voice as cold as the metal door handle in my hand. Not anymore. I opened the door, letting the cool morning air rush in. It hit me all at once, crisp, sharp, fresh. It smelled like rain. I breathed it in like it was the first breath I'd taken in years. Felt different out there. Cleaner. Lighter. Like the weight of him didn't exist beyond the threshold of that house. He didn't follow me. I could feel it. He stayed at the top of the stairs, probably still trying to figure out what his next move was. Probably thinking about how to spin this, how to make himself look like the victim when he told his friends. She just left me. Out of nowhere. Crazy, right? I knew he'd do it. I knew it because I'd seen him do it to other people. But I wasn't other people. Not anymore. I wheeled my suitcase down the driveway, each click of the wheels on the pavement sounding like a countdown. I didn't stop. I didn't glance back. I'd always hated when characters in movies did that, the last glance at the house before they left. It always seemed so pointless. What was there to look at? A place where you were lied to? A place where your love was taken for granted? No, I didn't need one last look. I'd already seen enough. My car was parked on the street, right where I'd left it. I popped the trunk, lifted the suitcase in, and shut it with a firm slam that echoed in the quiet neighborhood. I stood there for a second, my breath fogging up in the cool air. I felt it. That shift. Like when you close a book on the final page and know you're never going to read it again. I got into the driver's seat, closed the door, and sat there for a moment, hands on the steering wheel. I didn't start the car right away. I just sat, breathed, let my heart catch up to my body. My hands were steady. My mind was steady. For once, everything felt clear. I glanced at my phone on the passenger seat. For a second, I considered playing some music. But I didn't. Not yet. I didn't want to hear love songs or heartbreak songs or any songs. Not for a while. I'd heard enough of Ethan's soundtrack to last me a lifetime. Instead, I just sat in the quiet, feeling it settle around me like a blanket. The kind of quiet that isn't lonely but peaceful. The kind of quiet that means you're finally free. I gripped the wheel a little tighter, leaned forward and started the engine. It roared to life with a low, steady hum. Not a song. Not a playlist. Just the clean, steady hum of something reliable. Something that wouldn't lie to me. I drove. The trees blurred past, the white lines on the road flickering like a pulse. I didn't think about where I was going. I just followed the road. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes it's everything. When I pulled up in front of Anna's house, she was already waiting on the porch. She had her arms wrapped around herself, a hoodie pulled up over her head, and a bottle of red wine dangling from her fingers. She waved at me like I'd just come home from a long trip. No questions.
No judgment.
Just her. Just my sister. I parked, got out, and closed the car door with a quiet click. Anna didn't say anything at first. She just stepped forward, pulled me into a hug, and squeezed tighter than she ever had before. I didn't even realize I'd been holding my breath, until I felt it leave me all at once. Like every ounce of tension I'd carried finally had permission to go. "Wine first, or you want to burn something?" she asked, pulling back with a grin. I let out a laugh. A real, full laugh that shook my chest and left me breathless. "Wine," I said, grinning back at her. "Then maybe something flammable." We went inside. She locked the door behind us. And for the first time in a long, long time, I felt like I was somewhere safe. No lies. No secrets. No playlists with hidden meanings. Just my sister. Just me. And that was enough. For now, that was enough. We sat on Anna's couch with our legs curled under us, the bottle of wine already halfway gone. She poured me another glass, filling it to the top like she always did when she knew I needed it. The warmth of the wine settled into my chest, loosening something tight that had been coiled there for far too long. Her TV was on in the background, low volume, playing some mindless sitcom neither of us was watching. It was just noise to fill the spaces between our words. Anna leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees, her sharp green eyes locked on me. She didn't ask right away. She never did. She knew me too well. She'd wait until I was ready. "So," she said finally, swirling the wine in her glass like she had all the time in the world. "Are we talking about it, or are we pretending it's just another Tuesday?" I let out a dry laugh, shaking my head. If I could pretend it was just another Tuesday, I would. I took a sip, the wine sweet and bitter all at once, just like today. But no, we're talking about it. Anna raised an eyebrow, her face still calm, but her eyes sharp. "All right," she said, leaning back, giving me space but not letting me off the hook. "Hit me with it." I took a deep breath, staring at the rim of my glass. It was easier to talk to the wine than to look at her. "He had a playlist," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. "A playlist called Lena." I let the name sit there for a second, waiting to see if it would hurt less the second time I said it. It didn't. Anna's brows drew together slowly, confusion shifting into recognition, and then her eyes hardened. "Lena," she repeated, like she was testing how it felt in her mouth. "And I'm guessing that's not the name of a band." "Nope," I said, taking another sip of wine. It burned a little on the way down. 23 songs. All love songs, all about sneaking around, wanting someone you're not supposed to have. He thought I wouldn't notice. Anna let out a long breath through her nose, slow and controlled, the way she did when she was trying not to lose her temper too fast. "He's dumber than I thought," she muttered, her eyes narrowing like she was picturing him in front of her. "A whole playlist. He might as well have written it in neon on your front lawn." "I know," I said, letting out a short, bitter laugh. "He always thought he was so smart. Always one step ahead. Thought I'd never check." I set my glass on the coffee table and leaned forward, rubbing my hands over my face. But I did. I checked. And now I can't unsee it. Anna didn't say anything right away. She watched me carefully, taking slow sips of her wine, like she was giving me time to let it all out. That's the thing about sisters. They know when to push and when to just be there. I leaned back into the couch, letting my head rest on the cushion. I thought I'd feel worse. I admitted, staring up at the ceiling. I thought I'd be crying, screaming, breaking dishes. But I'm not. I just feel done. Anna nodded slowly, like she understood exactly what I meant. That's how you know you're really done, she said quietly. When you don't even want to fight anymore. When you're not even angry. Just tired. Yeah, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Tired. We sat in silence for a bit. Just the two of us breathing in the quiet. The sound of the sitcom played in the background. Someone on screen laughing too hard at a joke that wasn't funny. It felt strange, hearing laughter in a moment like this. But maybe that's life. People laugh while other people fall apart. The world keeps going, even when yours stops. Anna reached over and squeezed my hand. Her grip was strong, steady, like she was grounding me. I'm proud of you, you know that? She said, her voice serious now. I glanced at her, eyebrows raised. For what? For packing a suitcase. For leaving, she said firmly. Her eyes locked on mine like she was making sure I really heard it. You could have stayed. A lot of people stay. They make excuses, tell themselves it'll get better, tell themselves he'll change. But you didn't. She leaned in, her face fierce. You saw it. You knew what it was. And you left. You didn't wait for it to get worse. I blinked, feeling tears welling up in my eyes. I wasn't sure why that hit me so hard. But it did. I hadn't thought about it like that. I'd spent so much time feeling like I'd failed. Like I wasted years of my life on someone who didn't deserve it. But she was right. I left. It chose me. I squeezed her hand back tighter this time. Thanks, Anna. Don't thank me, she said, smirking. Just promise me you're done for real. I'm not about to help you move back in with that idiot. Trust me, I said, wiping my eyes quickly before the tears could really fall. There's nothing for me back there. She smiled and raised her glass in a mock toast. To no more idiots. I laughed, lifting my glass to meet hers. To no more idiots. The hours passed without me realizing it. We talked about everything and nothing. About the time she caught her ex cheating. About the way people think they can outsmart you. About what it's like to walk away from someone you thought you'd be with forever. She told me about her coworker who just found out her husband had a whole second family in another state. We laughed so hard at the absurdity of it that my sides hurt. Sometimes when it's all too much you have to laugh. You have to. By midnight I felt lighter. Not healed, not whole, but lighter. My chest didn't feel as tight. My thoughts weren't as loud. I could breathe again. I stayed up with Anna until 2 a.m. Both of us wrapped in blankets, faces flushed from wine, talking about what I'd do next. Not what we would do. Just me. For the first time in years my future was mine alone. No us, no we. Just me. I'm thinking about taking some time off, I said, tapping my glass with my nails. Maybe go stay with Mom for a bit. Clear my head. Anna nodded, a little smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. Yeah, that sounds good. Mom's been saying she misses you anyway. She just wants me to help her clean the garage, I said, laughing. But yeah, maybe I'll go. You should, Anna said, stretching her arms over her head. And while you're there, you should make a new playlist. She grinned at me, eyes sharp with mischief. Call it Freedom. Or Better Than Him. I laughed so hard I had to set my wine down to keep from spilling it. God, you're awful. Awful but right, she said, her grin growing wider. You know I'm right. And she was. She was absolutely right. Later that night, long after Anna had gone to bed, I sat alone in her living room. The house was quiet, the only sound the soft hum of the heater kicking on. I sat there in the dim light, scrolling through Spotify on my phone. I hovered over Ethan's profile. For a moment, I was tempted to check if he'd added more songs to that stupid Lena playlist. But I didn't. I scrolled right past it, heart steady, mind clear. Instead, I created a new playlist. I didn't call it Freedom, or Better Than Him like Anna suggested. No. I called it Another Tune. And song by song I filled it with my music. Not his. Not ours. Just mine. Songs that made me feel strong. Songs that reminded me who I was before him and who I could be after him. By the time I finished, I had a smile on my face and a warmth in my chest that no wine could match. I plugged in my headphones, leaned back on the couch and hit play. The first song started. It was new. Unfamiliar. And for the first time in a long, long time I felt good. The next morning, I woke up to the soft glow of sunlight streaming through the curtains. For a moment I didn't know where I was. The unfamiliar weight of the blankets, the slightly firmer cushion beneath me, and the faint sound of birds chirping outside all felt wrong. My body tensed, heart thudding in confusion until I remembered. I wasn't home. Not home anymore, I corrected myself. I was at Anna's. Her spare bedroom smelled faintly of lavender, and the soft hum of her old heating vent filled the air with a gentle white noise. I blinked slowly, my eyes adjusting to the soft light. No sound of Ethan snoring. No smell of his aftershave clinging to the sheets. Just me alone in a space where I was finally free. The realization didn't hit like a punch. It was slow and warm, like stepping into a sunlit room after being in the cold too long. I didn't have to brace myself for his mood. I didn't have to worry about what version of him I'd get that day. I didn't have to smile through little lies and pretend they didn't cut me. I sat up, rubbing my eyes, and glanced at my phone on the nightstand. No missed calls. No messages. For some reason I expected to see his name lighting up my screen, but it wasn't there. A small part of me felt disappointed, not because I wanted to hear from him, but because it confirmed something I already knew. He wasn't going to chase me. That's the thing about men like Ethan. They don't chase. They only control. And once they lose control, they lose interest. I slid out of bed, feet hitting the cold hardwood floor, and winced at the chill. Wrapping Anna's old hoodie around me, I padded into the hallway and down the stairs. The house smelled like coffee and toast. The faint clinking of dishes told me Anna was already awake. "Morning, runaway bride," she called out as I entered the kitchen. She was standing by the stove, spatula in hand, flipping pancakes like it was any other day. Her hair was a mess, tied up in a bun that had clearly been redone 3 times too many. She glanced over her shoulder at me, her grin as sharp as ever. "You sleep okay?" "Better than I have in weeks," I admitted, pulling out a chair at the kitchen table. I leaned on my elbows, letting out a long, slow breath. Didn't wake up thinking about him for once. "Good," Anna said, flipping another pancake with a sharp sizzle. "He doesn't deserve space in your head. Rent-free, no less." She nodded at the coffee pot. "Pour yourself a cup." I made it strong. I got up, grabbed a mug from the cabinet, and filled it to the brim. The first sip was hot, a little too bitter, but it was perfect. I leaned against the counter, letting it warm me from the inside out. For a moment, I watched Anna move around the kitchen like it was her personal stage. Quick, efficient, no wasted effort. She always knew exactly what to do, where to be, how to move. I envied that about her. "You got plans today?" she asked, tossing the final pancake onto the growing stack. I thought about it for a second, sipping my coffee slowly. "No," I admitted. "Not really. I was thinking about calling Mom." Anna raised an eyebrow, setting the spatula down with a clatter. "Mom? Oh, you must be in a mood if you're calling Mom." She gave me a playful smirk as she sat across from me, sliding the plate of pancakes into the center of the table. "What, you want to hear a 3-hour lecture about how you should have seen the signs?" She made air quotes with her fingers. "Or you in the mood for, I always knew something was off about him." I rolled my eyes, but I couldn't help the small laugh that escaped me. I know, but she'll find out eventually, and I'd rather get ahead of it before she makes it a whole thing." Anna poured syrup over her stack, eyes still sharp with amusement. "You're braver than me," she muttered, slicing into her pancake. "If it were me, I'd fake my own death before calling her." "Don't tempt me," I said, grinning despite myself. "But honestly, I don't think I'm afraid of her anymore." Anna glanced up, her fork halfway to her mouth. She tilted her head like she was seeing me for the first time. "Look at you," she said, pointing her fork at me like she'd just spotted something important. "Look at you getting all self-assured and powerful. About damn time, Em." I rolled my eyes again, but she wasn't wrong. I did feel different. Lighter. Not just because I'd left Ethan, but because I'd stopped second-guessing myself. It's funny how fast you forget what it feels like to trust your own instincts. But once you remember, you never want to lose that feeling again. After breakfast, I called Mom. It went exactly how I expected it to. She gasped, she sighed. She asked too many questions too quickly. She did that tisk sound she always makes when she's disappointed, like she's tapping her tongue against her teeth. But in between all the judgment she surprised me. "I'm proud of you, Emma," she said softly. Her voice lost that sharp, scolding edge it always had. I know that wasn't easy. That's when I knew I'd be okay. Not because of her words, but because for the first time in years, I didn't need them. I wasn't looking for validation. I wasn't looking for someone to tell me I did the right thing. I knew it already. Later that afternoon, I scrolled through my phone, idly opening and closing apps without much thought. I tapped on Spotify, and for a brief moment, I hovered over Ethan's profile. His playlists were still there. Lena. Late hours. All of it. I could have clicked on them. I could have scrolled through every song, every lyric looking for more clues, more pain. But I didn't. Instead, I opened my own profile. My new playlist, Another Tune, was still there, untouched since I'd made it the night before. I clicked on it, scrolled through the songs I'd added and smiled. It wasn't filled with love songs. It wasn't filled with heartbreak songs either. It was filled with me. Music that made me feel alive. Music that made me feel like me again. I added one more song to the list. A song I hadn't heard in years, but had always loved. It wasn't a love song. It wasn't a sad song. It was one of those anthems. The kind of song you play with the windows down, letting the wind whip through your hair, while you scream the chorus at the top of your lungs. I hit play, letting it fill the room. The beat hit first, strong, steady bolt. Then the first lyric came in sharp and certain. "Don't tell me to stay, 'cause I'm already gone." I smiled so wide it almost hurt. I stood up, pacing the room, letting the music wash over me. My feet moved without thinking, a small sway of my hips, a bounce in my step. I turned it up louder, so loud that I didn't hear Anna come down the hall until she was already in the doorway. Her grin was wild and wide. "Oh, hell yes," she shouted over the music. "That's the energy I like to see." She rushed in, grabbing my hand, spinning me in a circle like we were kids again. Dancing in the kitchen while Mom yelled at us to calm down before you break something. But we didn't calm down then, and we didn't calm down now. We danced like idiots, laughing so hard my cheeks hurt. The wine from last night still hummed in my blood, making me feel reckless and light. The music blasted around us, loud enough to drown out everything else. No playlists made for other women. No lyrics about picking someone else over me. Just me, my sister, and a song that belonged to no one but us. We danced like we didn't have ex-husbands. We danced like no one had ever lied to us. We danced like women who had finally remembered who they were. And for the first time in a long time I felt it. Peace. Not the quiet kind. Not the kind that comes from silence or stillness. But the kind you earn. The kind you fight for. The kind that tastes like wine, feels like freedom, and sounds like a song that's yours and yours alone. Hours later, after the music had faded and our laughter had finally quieted, I sat on the couch next to Anna, feeling a kind of calm I hadn't felt in years. Not numb. Not hollow. Just still. My head leaned against her shoulder, and she didn't say anything. She didn't have to. We both knew what this moment was, a pause. A quiet, sacred pause before life started moving again. The sun had shifted lower in the sky, streaks of orange and pink cutting through the window blinds. Golden hour. I stared at the light stretching across the hardwood floor, long and soft like the end of a long day. It reminded me that endings aren't always sharp. Sometimes they fade slowly, little by little, until you look up and realize everything has changed. "Hey," Anna said quietly, breaking the stillness. "You okay?" I thought about it. Really thought about it. My fingers ran over the edge of the blanket draped across my lap. For the first time I didn't feel like I had to lie. I didn't have to put on a brave face or fake strength for anyone. I could just be honest. "Yeah," I said, letting the word settle in my chest. "I think I am." Anna smiled at that. "Good." She nudged me lightly with her shoulder. "About time." We sat there for a while longer, watching the sun sink lower, letting the quiet stretch out. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that feels earned. The kind of silence that says you made it through. After a while, Anna got up to start dinner. I stayed on the couch watching the way the light shifted, how it moved slower now like it wasn't in a rush anymore. For the first time I realized that I didn't have to be in a rush either. There was no deadline.
No timeline.
No next step. I had to figure out right now. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, the screen lighting up with a soft glow. I glanced at it, heart instinctively tightening the way it always did when I expected bad news. But it wasn't bad news. It was a text from Ethan. Ethan, can we talk? Please. Just once. I need to explain. I stared at it for a long moment. Not with anger. Not with sadness. Just clarity. I knew what he wanted. He didn't want to explain. He wanted control. He wanted to twist the story into something that didn't make him look like the bad guy. He wanted to dangle hope in front of me, make me doubt myself, make me think that maybe, just maybe, I'd misunderstood everything. But I didn't misunderstand anything. Not this time. I tapped on his message, stared at the blinking cursor for a moment, and typed 2 simple words. Me, I'm done.
No explanations. No arguments.
No space for him to talk me in circles. I hit send. Watched it go. A few seconds later, the red notification appeared. No reply. Just read. I smiled to myself, leaned back on the couch and let out a slow, deep breath. I expected to feel sad. I expected it to ache. But there was no ache.
No sting.
Just quiet. Clean, peaceful quiet. Anna came back into the living room, wiping her hands on a dish towel, glancing at me with that knowing look she always gave when she'd figured something out before I said it. Did you block him yet? She asked, tilting her head. I laughed, really laughed this time. A full, deep belly laugh that shook my whole body. Not yet, I said, still grinning. But I will. Do it now, she said, tossing the towel onto the chair. Why wait? She was right. Why wait? I picked up my phone again, went to Ethan's name in my contacts, scrolled down, and hovered over the option that said block contact. I hesitated for half a second, not because I had doubts, but because I wanted to remember this moment. The moment I chose myself. The moment I decided I was done letting someone else's choices hurt me. Click. Blocked. I set the phone down, leaned back into the couch, and sighed like I'd just put down a heavy bag I'd been carrying for too long. My whole body felt lighter. Like I could finally breathe. Like I could finally see clearly. Anna sat next to me again, nodding in approval. Proud of you, she said, tossing an arm around my shoulder. Yeah, I said softly, smiling to myself. Me too. The sun finally dipped below the horizon, and the room got darker, but I didn't mind. For the first time in a long, long time, I wasn't afraid of the dark. It didn't feel like something to run from. It felt like rest. That night, as I lay in Anna's spare bedroom, I scrolled through my playlist one last time. Another tune. The songs felt different now. No longer something to drown out the silence, but something to fill it. A soundtrack to my life. Not his, not ours, just mine. I added one last song to it before setting my phone down. It wasn't a sad song. It wasn't about love or loss. It was about freedom. I closed my eyes, let my head sink into the pillow, and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not peace. Not hope. Power. I'd thought for so long that power belonged to the people who left you waiting. The people who made you wonder. The people who had you questioning your worth. But I was wrong. Power wasn't about being in control of someone else. It was about being in control of yourself. Knowing when to stay. Knowing when to go. Knowing when to block a number and never look back. I didn't dream of him that night. I didn't dream of the house, or the playlist, or any of it. I just dreamed of a road stretching out in front of me. Long, open, endless. And this time, I was the one driving.